Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 31st of July 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Girish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. Behind the technical desk, Nick Green. And we will be joined live by David Scott, north of the border with Northern Exposure. Well, a few words on the weather before we get started. It's sunny here in Plymouth. Pretty unnerving, that actually, isn't it? Blue sky and sunshine. We've got some good reports. It's sunny in Windsor. It's sunny in Rhondda. And David's kindly told us that it's sunny north of the border. Well, before we bring David in, we'd just like to start off with reminding people of serious events which are still going on overseas. Mike, going to cover a little bit of Greece here.
Yeah, we've got Christine Lagarde here because the IMF has said that they're not going to play. In fact, they're not going to pay or play. They've told Athens that their high debt levels, their poor record of implementing reforms disqualify Greece from any further IMF bailout. And I'm sure Greece is really upset about that because of course, this is the model that the IMF has used right across the world, particularly in third world countries, where they lend some money and then put some pretty draconian terms on that loan, usually involving economic reform or reform of a whole host of things, including having tin pot dictators in charge of your country at the time. But this, of course, pretty much scuppers the potential deal that Greece is doing, which possibly not a bad thing for Greece, because after all, taking on another 80-something billion euros worth of debt isn't necessarily the best thing to be doing. But here we've got Ambrose Evans-Pritchard saying hats off to Peter Spiegel for another scoop. This is in the Financial Times. The IMF ain't playing ball, ergo all unravels. Greeks in storm beyond their ken. Well, he's right in the first bit, but of course it's not the Greeks that are in trouble here. It's the entire Western financial system and the European Union, the Eurozone. So it just doesn't stop at the Greek borders. So Ambrose Evans-Pritchard not being quite honest with that statement. David, what's your view of this situation as it unravels?
Well, it's very complex, and it's tying up with many sort of hidden players here. If you look at the German economy's surplus, export surplus, balance of payment surplus, it shot up as soon as the euro started, because the German currency is artificially undervalued because it's being combined with Greece and Italy and Spain and such like. So that benefits jobs in Germany, it benefits exports from Germany, and obviously the reverse is true if you happen to be in Greece. So there are many important things here. The Greek government and the Greek government spending is certainly one of them, but also the fact that if you start dancing to the IMF tune, what you're actually doing is allowing the bankers to run your country, and that's not good.
It never has been, indeed. Of course, you're talking about a balance of payments surplus. In Germany, we've got the biggest balance of payments deficit, as we were talking about yesterday, in all time, hitting us at the moment. This imbalance in Europe is it's a pretty dangerous situation, isn't it?
It certainly is. It's going to promote social unrest, I think, and strife, and as we see, a lot of people trying to cross borders at the moment. And what we're not going to see, I think, is very many wise decisions made, because the basic models, the basic understanding that drive all of this, the Keynesian model, is flawed at its heart.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay, well, David, I know you think quite highly of Christine Lagarde. I'll send you a copy of that image we've just shown, which should make your day, I think.
I don't know what to say to that, Brian. It's very kind of you, obviously, but my interest in Christine Lagarde is solely limited to study of human folly. It stops there.
Okay, that's fine. That's accepted. Well, important, aside from Greece, important things in this country. The announcement yesterday that Ben Fellows was not guilty, which was a verdict which seems to have clearly shocked some of the mainstream press and media, because from what we could see, day one of the trial, press and media across UK, of course, labelling him as a fantasist. And then suddenly yesterday we get a result from that jury saying Ben Fellows not guilty of perverting the course of justice. Let's have a little look at some of the factors which the mainstream press have just not covered at all. UK Column tweeted this out yesterday, and we got quite a high retweet on it, so people obviously picked up. What we were getting at is bottom left, the BBC hammered Ben Fellows straight away. Ken Clarke abuse claim, a fantasy, the court hears. And then they had to come out with a headline yesterday, Ken Clarke, sex abuse accuser Ben Fellows is cleared. But of course the BBC was really spinning the news by doing zero investigative reporting. They didn't talk about why the police had harassed him, why the police were so aggressive. They didn't comment on the fact that the police had said that some politicians were above the law. They didn't look into why these charges were cooked up against Ben Fellows. No substance in the BBC at all. It all appeared to us to be spin. Well, was it something to do with this lady, Theresa May? Of course, this is the Home Secretary who says she's going to be working exceptionally hard to leave no stone unturned as she gets in amongst child abuse in the establishment. Well, of course, her Crown Prosecution Service went for Ben Fellows just as they go for Melanie Shaw or Mickey Summers or any of these other child abuse victims. So hollow words, in fact, we'll say that lies from the Home Secretary, clearly no intention to get a proper inquiry going over child abuse, and clearly no protection and support for some of the key victims. But another organisation that was having a good go at Ben Fellows has been Exaro. Remember that this is the news outlet that says it's there to really help get the truth out about child abuse. Well, they were crowing very early on that they'd actually helped the Met Police in proving that what Ben Fellows had to say was untrue. They hammered Ben Fellows. But again, we're saying, isn't it interesting that this organisation has been absolutely failing to investigate child abuse victims. And here we are. We've got just a simple search on Google shows the type of material that Exaro has been putting out, and clearly weighted against Ben Fellows. So no investigation into what was really going on. But in the early days, Exaro was simply basing their comments on the work of David Henke. We say if you haven't seen GuardianLies.com, maybe that's a very good website to look at to understand something about how mainstream reporting is done. I'm just going to put, excuse me. Right, so here's Ben Fellows. Let's have a look at what The Guardian reported. We've got a spokeswoman for Clarke saying the police always made it clear that they regarded Mr. Clarke as a victim and a witness in this case. Since receiving the verdict, they have assured Mr. Clarke that they regard this matter as closed, and Mr. Clarke takes the same view. So how interesting that we've got the Met Police apparently saying, well, of course, Mr. Clarke was a victim. We've got Ben Fellows now judged not guilty by a jury, a lot of questions to answer. And let's bring in some of those in yellow. We've got everything that was done to Ben, threatened and harassed by the police, his family frightened quite considerably, to the extent that Ben leaves UK to try and bring some peace to them. And then the Met Police state on record that some politicians are above the law. He's arrested, he's put into Wormwood Scrubs, and then he's charged with this very interesting charge of perverting the course of justice. According to The Guardian, Ken Clarke is a victim. Before I just bring you in, David, here, This is one of the YouTube videos which was originally taken by Ben Fellows, in which you can see the police interviewing him and hear some of the remarkable things they say. But what a state of affairs that basically we've got politicians and members of the establishment above the law.
Yes, and what a good thing the jury trial is. Would Ben Fellows be free today if he had to stand in front of a single judge who would make that decision the way that happened to Robert Greene in Scotland? I suspect he wouldn't be. As you know, the Scottish authorities always threatened Robert Greene with a jury trial and a potentially bigger sentence, and never came through with that because they couldn't put him in front of a jury, because you and I both know a jury would believe him. And clearly a jury here was entirely unconvinced by the state's claim that Ben Fellows had some form of attempt to pervert the course of justice for whatever reason. Don't think a reason was ever really given. Yes, well, jury trials came out well, and there's still some honesty in the English justice system, which is good to see.
Yeah. But a number of questions to be answered, and I know a little bit later in the programme we're just going to be looking at the fact that north of the border we've got both local papers and The Guardian starting to say that questions need to be asked of Police Scotland. So interesting that the press, the media can ask the right questions in some cases, but Ben Fellows don't want to get involved, don't want to challenge the Met Police. Well, could we explain why? Let's have a look at that slide again. Ben Fellows, this is the thing that's been occupying people, and that verdict came out yesterday. What's going on behind the scenes, though? We'll have a look at this. Thank you very much for the person who pointed this out. Yesterday, a good day to bury bad news, basically. They dropped the Cyril Smith investigation. So, quite remarkable. Police investigation into claims Cyril Smith was released by officers after being found with child porn has been closed due to lack of evidence. And we've got Northamptonshire Police Special Branch saying they'd undertaken a manual trawl of their archives, and the Crown Prosecution Service had also searched its archives, but relevant information, they haven't found anything. It's just remarkable, isn't it?
They lost the dossiers.
Well, I think you'd probably say misplaced, possibly, but all of that evidence coming up against Cyril Smith, MPs saying that there's something badly wrong, but just can't find the evidence. It's disappeared. Don't know what else to say, really. There we have it.
Well, The Guardian here reporting how hundreds of UK sex abuse victims are losing compensation for committing crimes. They're saying the Compensation Authority has stated that 438 people had payouts docked since 2010. So a total of 12,665 people who suffered child abuse. Can we just say that again? 12,665 people who suffered abuse as children or vulnerable adults have been awarded compensation by the Criminal Injuries Compensation Authority. 12,665. It is a pretty staggering number, I think. But then the BBC put in some freedom of information requests and discovered that 438 of them had their payouts docked as a result of having committed some kind of conviction for drink, drug, theft, or property offences. And what I found particularly offensive about this statement was the comment from the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice made a statement saying, under the scheme, an applicant may be refused or awarded a reduced payment if they have an unspent conviction. This reflects the fact that they may have caused distress, loss, or injury to another person and cost the taxpayer money through a police investigation or court proceeding. So these are people that have been abused systematically under the care system in this country. And the Ministry of Justice is docking money from them on the basis that they may have caused distress, loss or injury to another person and cost the taxpayer money. It's a pretty staggering situation, isn't it?
Well, I think we're really starting to see the truth of the matter here. That I'm going to bring in another article straight after this one, which is to do with cost. But this is the lie of austerity. We've got to save money, and people who've suffered post-traumatic stress as a result of the abuse. Well, does the state care? No, we're going to dock money because you're going to probably cause trouble. This is quite outrageous. I'll just bring this in, and we'll then see what David thinks. But here we are, a magistrate resigning over new court fees that he says forces the innocent to plead guilty, and these have been brought in by the back door. The magistrate says justice is only going to be for those who can afford it after criminal court's charge is introduced. So this man goes, he says it's a terrible piece of legislation introduced through the back door, and he fears the rules, which courts have no discretion over, could criminalise many people because that is the option for them. Justice is only going to be for those who can afford it. And if you want to know what sort of sums of money we're talking about, in the Crown Court, you could be doing something to do with £900, £1,200. And basically, if you plead not guilty and are then found to be guilty, they simply slap more charges on. So we're really seeing it now. We've got the Metropolitan Police saying, well, OK, it's quite clear that politicians, senior members of the establishment are above the law. That's what they said to Ben Fellows in an interview. And we've now got the fact that if you're poor, you're going to have to plead guilty because otherwise the state is going to charge you. David, this is in your face. This is a police state being installed not by the year in UK, but by the day. Remarkable.
Yes, very rapid movements. I was shocked by the figure that Mike gave there, 12,665. The reason for docking their payments, or docking 438 payments, was very interesting. They mentioned causing loss of property or physical harm, but also costing the taxpayer money. Now, I wonder whether the costing the taxpayer money actually means that there have been convictions for drink and drugs offences. Now, these do not involve causing anyone loss or harm. And if you've been through the sort of trauma that many of the people who have suffered child sexual abuse have been through, it's in fact quite understandable and normal that some degree of self-medicating would take place with illegal drugs or with alcohol. So I would be very interested to see how many of those 438 cases are in fact drugs and drink charges.
Well, sorry, David, according to the Freedom of Information request, 27 people in the year to June 2015 had payments docked, and half of those were for drink and drug theft or property offences. 8 of them were for violence. But most of these people, if we take, I'm not saying Melanie Shaw has done this, but this is a good example. These people are so significantly traumatised, not only by the events that happened to them, but by the state's response to those events, that to me, it's just unsurprising that their frustration, not only are they self-medicating, but sometimes their frustration is going to spill over, and they may indeed become violent. And I would not really have anything but sympathy for them in that event because of the way that they're being treated by the state. But am I being on?
Well, no, I quite agree. I think that's an important point, that there is going to be inevitably frustration and violence, and that any system that aims at justice would take the whole picture into account before it docks payments, etc. But my point was a simpler one, that there should be no question of any restriction of payments based solely on victim-free offences to do with drink or drugs. I think that's entirely inappropriate under any circumstances. Mm. Yes, and as far as only having access to the law if you have a lot of money, this is true, and it has to be an awful lot of money. because the middle class no longer have access to the law, really. You need to be... To go to law, you need what? A budget of 20 to £100,000 to seek justice through these means. There's very few people in this country can really afford that. So there are two options. You either have legal aid or you have no recourse to justice.
Yeah. Well, just as a final comment, just to get people thinking, obviously Ben Fellows found not guilty, as you say, by a jury. What a critical thing the jury is, key part of our common law and constitution. We should remember that Ken Clarke, of course, one of the leading Conservative MPs, who says that we need secret courts, and if you don't want secret courts, you're not a right-thinking person. I think we can see why.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at what the police have been up to in Nottingham with Tom Crawford.
Right, so here we've got, well, you and I, David, seem to have put freedom of information requests in at about the same time regarding this. Well, the first thing that I want to highlight here, that they haven't put yours up on the Nottinghamshire Police website yet, but my one is up. They have. I didn't call it this. They've called it this: costs of Operation Hooper. So, just want to make the point that this police action has a name, Operation Hooper, as you discovered in your freedom of information request. So here's my answer first. And the first thing, I simply asked how much did it cost, and I asked who pays the bill. And they've basically said that, well, first of all, we can't say how much it cost, because in order to do that, then every police operation would have to get an individual cost code, and that would have to, that's just too much difficulty. So we can't say how much it cost. And then the second point they made was who pays for it. And they're saying that because this was a normal police operation, that the taxpayer, the council taxpayer, pays for it, comes out of the normal police budget. Well, I just had a look at a set of accounts. This was the first set of accounts that I could find from Nottingham Police, and it's for 2012, 2013. And the interesting thing about this is that they have a line item there called Special Operations. Now, I don't know what that means. Maybe somebody can help me with that. But, maybe I'm putting two and two together and getting six. I don't know. But this event to remove Tom Crawford's family from their house was given an operational name, Operation Hooper. And so is that a special operation? I don't know, but certainly special operations have a line item. And I'm just going to ask the question here, is this response from Nottingham Police accurate when they say that they cannot tell me how much it cost because it just falls into the normal budget? Now, the one thing that they did say in their response to me was that in addition, there were additional costs to the normal everyday costs, and that was £6,600 overtime and £1,000 for food and sustenance. So that we know that much at least, but they certainly don't know any more. Now, your answer, which they haven't put on the website yet, you asked some different questions. So run us through this.
Yes, well, I was asking who was in charge, so I got the name there. I don't know if you can zoom in on that.
Well, it's Chief Superintendent Mark Holland.
Yes, so he was the man in charge. And then I asked how many people it took to evict Tom from his home. And the answer was a somewhat surprising 129 police officers to remove the Crawford family. But don't worry, only 50 at any one time. So we were operating a shift system. And I didn't get anywhere on costs, obviously, for the same reason. But I also asked what documentation they saw to convince the Nottingham Police that this was a lawful operation. And they said that they don't possess, but they saw a copy of a county court warrant. So that seems pretty low-grade documentation to me to launch 129 officers to evict a family from their home. I would have hoped that they would have actually possessed some paperwork, not simply saw a copy of a county court warrant. I think we have some more questions to ask on that one.
Indeed, but as well as that, in that response, you asked about meetings that they held?
Well, yes, I asked when they started to plan the operation, and the answer was 20th of May. So it's been a long time in the planning, because 129 people in all those vans and things, it takes a while to organise. So they started to plan this in secret on the 29th of May. In a meeting with the UKAR Limited, people who hold the debt, and that meeting took place in the county court buildings. I thought that was quite interesting.
Well, that seems to imply something more than normal police operations then.
Well, it does sound a little bit like collusion, doesn't it? But
or at least a special operation.
Well, yeah, I think the one thing that you couldn't describe that operation was normal.
No.
There was nothing normal about it. It was certainly special. They were sitting down planning it since the 20th of May, and they were planning with the bailiff organisation who were trying to undertake the eviction, and they were doing this on only a county court warrant and only a copy at that.
Right, so you made the point about the warrant and getting a copy of the warrant, and indeed in the chat box somebody is asking the question, where is the wet ink? And this, just by coincidence, this might seem like a very small thing, and it is a very small thing, but it brought an interesting little nugget of information out, because across the road from our offices at the T-junction, there is a new set of double yellow lines that have been painted on the road, which means you can't park there. And the length of the double yellow lines from the distance from the corner to the end of the double yellow lines seemed to be quite long to me, so I simply asked the local council for a copy of the relevant road traffic order which justified the painting of the lines on the road. Seems like a silly thing, but here we go. Here is the front page of that order. And as you can see, it's just text on a page. It says City of Plymouth Traffic Regulation Orders Amendment, blah, 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 and so on, right? But on the last page, remember, this is an order which changes legislation. It creates a new regulation and allows them to paint lines on the road. On the back, on the last page, here we go. The order shall come in force on a date. It is dated, it is signed, and it has the common seal of the Council of the City of Plymouth. So it is sealed, signed, and dated. And at the end of the day, I want to ask the question, if this is the standard of seal that is required on a document, on an order to put yellow lines on a road, why has Tom Crawford never seen the warrant sealed, signed, and dated, which justified the taking of his property? Have the police seen this warrant sealed, signed, and dated? Now, this is a copy of the warrant, but you can quite clearly see, or a copy of the order, but you can quite clearly see on this order that it is a proper seal, and these seals are not appearing on any court documents. So that's the question that I want to ask. If something as insignificant as double yellow lines gets this standard of seal, signature, and date, why are our court documents not seeing the same standard?
I think that's an excellent question. I would love to hear the answer to that one.
Yes.
Well, I think we're going to get closer to it, and I love Guy Taylor's description of the unicorn warrant. That's the name of the beast that we're after. Let's see how long it takes to turn up so that we can actually see that such a creature exists. But I think Guy's right, the creature doesn't exist. Yeah. Well, David, take us north of the border. You've got a number of very interesting things here. The first image we've got is Alex Neil's Facebook page.
Yes, Alex Neil is doing a tour, a grand tour of Scotland, and he's going and he's speaking to the people. And you covered the first one of this, Brian, on your programme about a week and a half ago. And it was in Glasgow, and it was at a swimming pool building, which had been recently refurbished, a historic swimming pool building, and they had laid out tables on the bed of the dry swimming pool, and there was Alex Neil talking to the people of Scotland. And quite a lot of them wanted to talk about the named person scheme, and they were quite strident in their views on this, and they were quite clear that they didn't want it and didn't need it, and that it was an unlawful infringement on the rights for a private home life without the state watching. So, the next time Alex turns up to meet the people, it's Kilmarnock, and this format has surprisingly changed. The format is now the people are arranged in tables, and some state functionary is assigned to the table to gather the views and pass them on to the minister, who's roaming around but not really engaging with the people. And the people have to insist that he comes and listens to them, and insist that he has some personal interaction with them, and he's very loath to do this. And some of the time is bizarrely filled with a musical number from Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, namely, Any Dream Will Do. So I think the people present found this a bit bizarre.
Right. So, David, what's actually happening on the Facebook page? I've got another one here. Are people being critical of what he's doing? Is that the
this is the Facebook. So the Facebook pages are following on from this. That Alex Neil's talking about his project for a fairer Scotland, and fairer means we'll blame other people and we'll steal the stuff. But he wants a fairer Scotland, whatever that actually means. Change we can believe in. It's one of these political phrases. But people are saying, well, if we want fairness, let's start by getting rid of the named person scheme. Mr. Neil then puts forward boilerplate text he's obviously been given, the stock government answer to criticism of the named person scheme. Yeah. And all the comments down below are complaining about this boilerplate text and wanting real answers. So what you're seeing here is that Scottish Government ministers can't actually go out in public and talk to the public, or go on Facebook and talk to the public, without them hearing the constant refrain, get rid of the named person scheme. We don't want it. We didn't ask for it. It's completely unlawful. It's totalitarian. Please stop. So we'll see if anyone in the Scottish Government is prepared to listen to the people.
Well, that actually gives us a very strong message, doesn't it? When people are saying, what can they do? A lot of people constantly chipping away at the members of Parliament, whether it's Scottish Parliament or south of the border, does have an effect. But there's it seems to me there's been a much stronger push over the death of Mr. Bayou in police custody, and a number of things arising here.
Absolutely, yes. From last Sunday Herald in Scotland, this was the cover, full-page cover story. We're talking the relatives of Sheku Bayou have started a campaign looking for the truth. They comment here, their family lawyer uncovered details of how he was restrained, and there was 5 officers on or around him. And we've been led to believe by Police Scotland that Sheku Bayou was an enormous and extremely powerful man, right? He was a man mountain. He was enormously strong. Imagine my surprise, Brian, to find out that this gentleman stands 3 inches shorter than me and weighs 3 stones less, and I don't regard myself as exactly a man mountain, dangerous to all around me. Even more surprising, one of the 5 officers that restrained him was 6'4" and weighed 25 stone. So the picture that's being painted by Police Scotland seems to be anything but accurate, anything but true. And the family are asking questions, and quite rightly so. No answers yet, of course. So there's quite a number of questions that are coming up. One of them surrounds whether or not there was a knife. In fact, it's now clear there was not a knife. But when the police initially reported on this event, they were claiming that Mr. Bayou was armed with a knife, was threatening people with a knife, was attacking a WPC with a knife. And it's now clear there was no knife. There was no knife found at the scene. There's no knife found on or around Mr. Bale. And a second item that's come into the public domain is there was a suggestion that this was in fact a terror threat activity, and were the police responding in that vein? Now, it wasn't terrorist activity or anything like it, but did the police think it was? We don't actually know the answer to that one either. We don't really know how he died, and we don't know whether excessive force was used, but it seems that it was positional asphyxiation, the most likely cause of death. We don't have anything official yet. And that comes from inappropriate restraint techniques.
David,
yes.
if I may, I'll just bring these two images up on screen. We've got Herald Scotland here setting out the questions that need, or what the unanswered questions are. This is pretty direct stuff. And also we've got The Guardian doing the same thing here. Scottish Police must provide answers.
I've got a quote from the Herald here. They said there was different versions of events. One of the questions is that different versions of events were provided by the police. The families say they were given 5 versions of how events unfolded over the course of 7 hours. Obviously a matter of grave concern. And then also what happened in the aftermath. Now, this is almost the most concerning thing of all. What the family claim is that 8 of the officers involved in the incident returned to the police station afterwards and went into the same room around 9 a.m. with a Scottish Police Federation rep, and they spent 2 hours there. The police have made much about the fact that the WPC was injured in this event and was admitted to hospital. She didn't spend long in hospital, and when she was released after a short spell, presumably in A&E, she didn't go home. She went to the police station and she joined this meeting. So we would really want to know what was said. You know, we've got a man who's dead. We've got 9 people involved. They're not questioned. They're not given 24 hours to calm down and then questioned. They're put in a room for 2 hours to talk with the rep. Now, that seems to be contrary to natural justice. That's asking for conspiracy. It's asking for stories to be straightened out, conflicts of accounts to be eliminated. That looks like an attempt to conceal the truth.
Well, David, I think I'm right in saying is that very procedure of allowing police to collude with each other before putting evidence forward is a pattern that's gone on in a number of cases. We've had it in some of the shooting incidents, and we clearly had it in the death of I've forgotten the gentleman's name, the man who died in London when the riots were on. But this is one of the key criticisms, that normally witnesses are separated and statements taken so that obviously they can't collude. But for the police, we've got a totally different procedure, which is to collude. I've just watched...
And it gets worse, if I may. It gets worse. And what the Guardian article said, quote, "What chills me most is that the PIRC, that's the Police Investigation Branch, does not have the power to compel officers who are witnesses to attend interviews. Michael Matheson, Scottish Justice Secretary, confirmed this week that officers' obligation to give statements was decided on a case-by-case basis. And he says he will not intervene in the police investigation into Bare's death, and has rejected calls for the PIRC to be given new statutory powers." So the Scottish Government hopes to let the Bale case drop, continuing the quote from The Guardian. If that happens, Scotland's police force would seem to be above the law. The motto of Police Scotland is keeping people safe. But how can any of us feel secure in a supposedly progressive, politically engaged New Scotland where police officers cannot be held to account?
Yeah.
Puts it very well.
So happening north of the border, happening south of the border. Just got two more of your articles here. I'm watching the clock a little bit, so if we can cover these reasonably quickly. We've got the tragic death of these two after Police Scotland were informed. And I think this is starting to put some real pressure on Chief Constable Sir Stephen House.
Well, the first one here is simply that one of the victims, the lady who died after 3 days in a ditch near Stirling, 10 days after that, Police Scotland phoned her and left a message on an answer phone, asked her to call back urgently. It's sensitive. They have apologised, but I mean, dear me, can we not? Do people actually making these phone calls not read newspapers? Do they not realise it's very poor? A much weightier issue is Sir Stephen House has been asked to resign with immediate effect by the official opposition in Scotland. The Labour Party, the gentleman was Hugh Henry, Labour Party justice spokesman, has stated that, quote, the public are rapidly losing confidence in Police Scotland after a series of major mistakes. He's called on Sir Stephen House to resign with immediate effect. And for me, I cannot see how anybody can continue in the role of Chief Constable when the official opposition, which represents a very sizable section of Scottish public opinion, think that confidence is gone and he must go immediately. Yep. He hangs on, but I really don't see how he can for much longer.
Well, at least it's going in the right direction. I'm going to say what a great shame we haven't got the same calls for Bernard Hogan Howe to go from the Met Police, particularly after what we've been learning over the last few days about Ben Fellows and, of course, other abuse victims. Well, thank you very much for that, David. Clock's moved on pretty quickly today, so we're just going to finish with, of course, very dangerous stuff that our own governments are involved with, which seems to be whipping up more war overseas.
Well, attempting to. So here we've got the Security Council, and the Security Council yesterday was trying to bring through a resolution calling for a tribunal to be established to try individuals and entities allegedly responsible for bringing down the Malaysian Airlines flight MH17. And naturally, the Russians vetoed that. Now, the fact of the matter is that the Russians made it clear their intention to veto that resolution before the resolution was even brought to the Security Council. So, there can be no other purpose in bringing it other than just to attempt to bring more pressure onto Russia. Putin said that they had an unchanged position, that it was, they absolutely objected to it. Well, what's been the response? This is The Economist's response. Russia confirms its reputation as an international thug, denying justice for victims of MH17. Okay. Well, so who's in charge of the Economist? Well, of course, it's this guy, Edward Lucas, and he's attempting to attack both Russia and Jeremy Corbyn at the same time here with these couple of tweets. Hello, Jeremy Corbyn. Do you believe that countries have the right to make post-colonial security choices, e.g. Ireland decided to be neutral? Because Jeremy Corbyn, if so, then surely ex-colonies of Kremlin have the right to make their choices too, e.g. joining NATO. So Edward Lucas and The Economist, which is supposed to be independent, it's supposed to be balanced. That's what they claim. Clearly not so balanced on this issue. So who is Edward Lucas? Well, here he is. Here's his website. And as you can see, he must have an ego the size of the planet, because he's put an image of himself on his website with the, with the halo behind. He clearly considers himself some kind of supernatural being. He is senior editor at The Economist. Apparently, he's an expert in energy, intelligence, and cybersecurity issues. And he covered Central and Eastern Europe for more than 20 years. He witnessed the final years of the Cold War and the fall of the Iron Curtain and the collapse of the Soviet Empire, so that must make him an expert. But he's also a senior vice president at the Centre for European Policy Analysis. And who are they? Well, they are an independent, allegedly, non-profit, non-partisan, they say, public policy research institute dedicated to the study of Central and Eastern Europe. And on their advisory council is none other than Zbigniew Brzezinski. It just goes on now. What's interesting about the Centre for European Policy Analysis is that earlier this year it was reported that the Pentagon, the Pentagon's Office of Net Management, commissioned the Centre of European Policy Analysis for a study and war games called Gaming Allies, Geostrategic Change in Alliances. So this organisation can hardly be called non-partisan under those circumstances, and certainly Edward Lucas's views can hardly be described as non-partisan. So he's also London School of Economics, by the way, if anybody's interested, and well, pretty nasty propaganda appearing in the Economist.
David, 30 seconds response, if you would like.
Well, the plane that was brought down over the Ukraine was full of bullet holes, cannon fire from another aircraft. That seems to be the explanation. The Russians have very interesting things to say about what their radar plot showed at the time. It wasn't a Russian missile, wasn't a missile from forces friendly to Russia. If I was the Russians, I wouldn't let the UN investigate this either. I would keep putting out truth and information. And if you compare the Russian account of this, which is highly detailed with a lot of data, to the American account, which is simply hearsay, accusation, and spin, the Russians come away with a lot more credibility.
Yeah, the Western basis for this is Twitter, isn't it?
Yes. Well, yeah. Remember, Twitter's replacing Nimrods as well, though. So don't be mean to Twitter.
Okay.
Well, that's true, and the 3D printer is also going to replace the Scottish fishing fleet. So you're going to be printing off those vessels in order for them to tweet. What a state of affairs. Well, on that happy note, we will end for today. Thank you very much, everybody who's joined us today. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
We will be back at 1 o'clock on Monday to have a new look at what's happening in UK and overseas. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Right.